Raw, real, and just a little dangerous. This is Feral. Y'all, I should have known that when I called an event feral and wore this dress that by this time in a 2-day event, I would really start to imitate the theme of the event, bouncing off the walls, energy drink off the walls, like how many minutes later and so I'm always so glad and so grateful to see your magnificent brain and beautiful face. But today I'm so grateful for this conversation because I have a sneak peek of what's coming, and what I really need right now is some Gwen, to be totally transparent. And guess what?
I am here for you, baby.
I was going to say that's exactly how you always show up and how you deliver. And I was trying to explain you to people earlier in the festival, and it was not a good attempt on my part at all. But I was just like, okay, Gwen, she's like this ops person, okay, but she's like a crafter, but she's like a wizard, but she's like an inventory manager, but she's like not. But then also she's like this, but then she's like this, but then like, and I was trying to explain that you have this beautiful harmony of ways that you've used your central skills, and I just instead just raved like a lunatic, like that's what I want to do.
And it's one of the reasons we love you. Is
oh my God,
because it is as you want to do.
but you know, there always needs to be an equal and opposite reaction, and I'm so glad that you and I can have fun and very real talks, and sometimes very rough talks that aren't fun, and sometimes fun just to have fun. And what I know that you're going to bring today is this deep sigh energy of like, shit's been getting real today. We've talked a lot about grief. Grief of identity, grief of income, grief of industry, grief of a dream. We've talked, and it's come up a ton. And so now I feel like I can't be the only person who's sitting here with this kind of not rain cloud. I'm not sad, but my head feels very full of mourning and releasing some things in the past while living in the present, and also sort of envisioning the what ifs that I've been asking everybody to consider these days, right? I feel like this is the point in the show, if you've been in it, or maybe you're just coming to us right on time and you're like, I'm saturated, yo. The reason I'm like, I need some Gwen is I need you to be like, how do we take this saturated feeling, turn it into usable self data, figure out what of it is necessary and useful, bless and release the rest in your own way, and I'm like, oh God, I'm so glad I get to talk to Gwen. So everybody, this is the therapy portion.
So funny that you say that, because one of my very first clients we probably started working together like 12 years ago. I mean, like, we have been working together for a while because she successfully sold her business. She is fully retired. That happened
right?
quite some. Yeah, I mean, like, all the positive things happen. We're not working together because she got pissed. But her first thing was like, she says, I have my therapist, and then I have my business therapist, and you are my business therapist. So yeah,
But like, I'm trying to
let's
like,
do some business therapy.
I always like introduce you with such soft skills intros, and then you're like, but hold on, if we look at the and I'm like, I've been in business, I've been self-employed for 20 years, and I don't understand anything you just said. So like, if you're also like, I don't understand how the mechanics of my own business work, you need a Gwen. Like, do not get me wrong, she's about to level set all of us in a glorious way. And she can also find all the waste in your business and turn it into like a song, right? And so make no mistake. But that being said, Gwen, will you Gwen us, please?
I would be happy to Gwen you. So where do you want to start? What do you? I mean, like, do you want to start on the grief stuff? Because we can start there.
How did you come to understand, with your background, and maybe this will be a good way to introduce your background as well, but how did you come to understand the importance not even necessarily of self-inquiry yet, but just of inquiry. How have you come to love questions? Did you love questions as a kid? Like,
Oh yeah, I was that annoying child, right? That, and as an extrovert, I was talking all the time, and so like I am the true definition of extrovert. We talk about it about energy
yes,
a
you
lot,
are.
which is also a true thing. But the other thing that's true about extroverts versus introverts, which a lot of people don't discuss, is true extroverts often don't know what's in their mind until it actually gets verbalized out of their mouth. And then it comes back into their ears, right? And so I am a true extrovert. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have been talking on a podcast or I've been working with a client or something, and I say something, and in my whole head, this happens, in an instant. It's like, oh my God, that was brilliant. I had no idea I knew that.
If
Right?
you
Because
haven't had that experience, start podcasting. Do exactly what Gwen said. It's a trip. I was
yeah.
backstage and I got to watch Tina Muheim watch an interview today that I did with Tina, and I got to watch Tina, and it's a trip. You're like, damn, I'm smart, right? So yes, continue. But like,
Yeah.
yes.
So as a child, I was always processing verbally because that,
Mhm.
was my natural way to process. And as part of it, I would ask lots of questions. But be, because they weren't calling it multi-passionate or, any of those terms way back when, but I've always been interested in lots and lots and lots and lots of things, forever. And so very early in my career, inadvertently was becoming a generalist, completely inadvertent. Because this happens. I was in a career, but it was a career where I was touching lots of different industries and lots of
Yeah.
different businesses in lots of different ways. And so I was getting all of this knowledge. And then as we moved into, I'll say the beginning of the 2000s, it became such a big deal about, you can't be a generalist. Generalists are useless, blah, 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 blah. I mean, very much about niche down, get focused, be
Right.
specialized. And finally, and it took a long, I mean, like I was like, this does not work for me. Like I knew that, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And so at some point, someone said, what do you specialize in? And I said, I specialize in being a generalist. And it
Boom.
was like, and they looked at me and I said, because a really good generalist is highly specialized. It's hard to find a really good generalist.
I apologize to everybody whose dogs I just woke up, but that was flippin' brilliant. I specialize in being a generalist because a legitimate generalist is highly specialized. Did she just explain all y'all out there who are like, I have 75 brands and don't know how to marry them? I have 42 companies and 3 that I haven't started yet. I am starting an LLC next Tuesday for funsies. Like, that's you. Okay, that is you. And I think it's so lovely that someone is like saying, you know what? Be a freaking generalist. Just be a damn good one. I
Well, be a
specialize
generous
in
generalist.
I am the very model of a modern major general, but like, yeah, I just, you blew my mind. I'm babbling now. You take up space. Shh, me.
But that was really the place. And that was where I started realizing that being able to reflect, on things from more than one perspective was a really valuable tool. And so it was some number of years ago. I can't tell you how long ago it was, but I was working with Matthew Kimberly. I'm a big fan of give credit where credit's due. So I was part of one of Matthew Kimberly's programs, and he talked about another program he had called the Single Malt Mastermind, and
Ooh.
the malt standed for more action, less talk. Okay, so it was a mastermind where you never actually met and you had never actually talked to anybody, which of course really isn't a mastermind. We're not going to get on that particular soapbox today, but that's okay.
Mhm.
Um, but it was an email. It was an asynchronous process that was an email, and he didn't even say he would respond to the email. He just said, I'm gonna ask you the same 4 questions or 2 questions, same 2 questions every day or
Mhm.
every week, once a week, and just reply. That's the thing, and it's basically, what are you doing? What have you done? What have you done, and what are you going to do? I
Yeah.
mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? So I told him, I said, I want to use this with my customers. What do I need to do? And he says, everyone says that, no one does it. Feel free. I was like, okay. It was like, at that point I was laughing. He's like, he obviously does not know.
I'm like, okay, Lord Cranky Pants, watch me. This event is called Feral. I feel like the people watching this, at least a whole bunch of us, are like, I'm sorry, was that a dare?
Right. No, exactly. But this truly was like, oh, you haven't met me.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he had met me and we were actually in person at the time that we had the conversation. So,
You said in person. It also sounded like in prison. I just want to clarify for the robot that's listening. We said that you met in person, not in
in
prison.
person.
You.
So I took the concept and I started using it with my clients, but I adapted it and modified it. And part of the thing that I did differently is I said, I will respond to you every week.
Mm.
So that was one of my big things is I will respond every week. I will look at it or someone else will. And if I can't, at the time I was pretty much working by myself. So if I was on vacation and I can't, I will let you know ahead of time, but I will look back, if I'm gone for 2 weeks, I will look back 2 weeks and
Mhm.
respond to all of those. Right.
Mhm.
So no excuses. And so I started doing that. And my clients that actively participated were doing so much better. They were
Yeah.
making more progress faster. And so then I started paying even more attention to it, and we added a few other things. One of the things that we added is my quarterly planning process that I do with all of my clients, regardless of what level we're working together in, which also freaks people out because they're like, you can't do that. You can't have the people who have 7 and 8 figure businesses meeting with the people who are in early stages because they're going to be freaked out.
Oh no, the entrepreneurial caste system will be violated.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, no, you just make it really clear that we're not comparing because you're right. The person who comes in who's at early stages, 5-figure, 6-figure, will freak out and say, I have nothing to offer. It's like, that's not true. You do. It's just not the same thing. And that's okay. And no, you shouldn't compare because there's a bazillion things that make your circumstances different than their circumstances. One of my key phrases I use all the time: context matters. Your
Yes.
context matters, right? And so there is no universal answer. It's all of those things. So that combined with what I started calling the weekly course of action ended up making more and more and more progress. So a number of years ago, I said I could actually offer this just as a standalone item, a weekly course of action. And I was curious to see how far people would get with it because most
Yeah.
everyone else was doing some amount of one-on-one coaching with me. So it was there was a combo thing. When I started offering it just by itself, I had people come and say, I got more. One of the first people said, I got more accomplished this quarter than I have in the last 2 years in my business. And so I followed up and said, so why do you think that was? And she says, because I knew you were paying attention and you weren't just checking off a box.
Okay. So, there's so many pieces there, right? There's so many pieces there because this is about self-inquiry, but also let's look at the other skeletal pieces in why that worked and why that happened and why that was so powerful for everyone involved. One of them is generosity of time. The first, and I'm not saying that the person that you were modeling this after and had modeled, like learned this from, was not being generous. That's not what I'm trying to say.
No.
I'm saying you decided within your capacity that you were going to show up generously, regardless of what anyone else did. Generosity, I like to think of it as a self-competitive game. Right? I
Right.
compete with me.
Yeah.
How can I out generous me? And then also, when do I need to rein in generous me and remember that I
Right.
have boundaries and limits? Right? Like
Right.
that's me and me. But all that to say, you did not have to hold that space. You did not have to choose that. And because you did, it not only showcased the kind of support available, it added and amplified through accountability because I knew you were watching and it wasn't just a checkbox. Right.
And
And
this,
yeah.
can I jump in?
Oh my
So,
God,
so
of course, it's your time. Shut me up.
and this was where I realized what we've been told as accountability is not, and
Mm,
what is accountability is different.
tell me more.
And that's when I got all excited about reflection, right? So I actually looked up, and I don't have it in front of me, but I looked up the definition of accountability, and accountability takes two people. because there has to be a conversation and back and forth, right? But a lot of people have taken that to be, said I did it, check, you did it. But that's not actually a conversation. That's not someone paying attention with similar intent to your success as you have.
Oh, guilty. I'm very, very guilty of that. My
Right?
versions of accountability are like, hey, I did the thing. Or like I have this app that I love called Finch that I use and I love, but it's like I brushed my teeth today, bird. Like, ooh, I was accountable. But you're right. There's no.
That is not accountability,
I
because
know.
accountability is about a conversation, and it's not about when things work. It's about when they don't work, right? Because when they work, how hard is that? That's easy. It's when they don't work. And true accountability does not include shame. And that's where a lot of people start pushing back on what they think is accountability, because they have associated it with shame. And it's not shameful. It's about saying, so what was the challenge that prevented you from doing this thing? Not like you're a bad person because you didn't do this thing, because that's, like I don't work with bad people, so that's just not ever true, right? So what was the challenge that was about this? So then we start having a dialogue back and forth. So the other thing that accountability takes is someone who can actually help them think through it. And so when I was working with my copywriter, someone you and I both love, Jamie Blair,
Yeah.
way back when, she had actually gone through the process, and she said the thing that's the big deal here is so often people get into accountability groups where they're in their own echo chamber and spiraling around one another.
Yes.
Because they all have the same answers to the same questions in the same ways, and someone needs a different answer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's fundamentally what I'm doing for all of my clients, whether I'm working with them one-on-one or we're just doing through the WCA, is to be, and this is where the generalist piece comes in, is I know enough to be able to ask the question to get them to the point, or to say, have you considered A, B, or C? Where most folks have an answer to most problems. I have 15 different answers to most problems, and my job is to figure out what are the 2 or 3 best answers for you, right? And so by having this dialogue, we can get there. And sometimes the dialogue is like, well, it doesn't sound like you want to do this. Do you even need to do this? Or is this one of those should things that someone told you you should do? And so that whole thing of like, I don't have to do this, it's like, no. So sometimes accountability is like, yeah, just stop doing it, which is not checking a box, right? It's the opposite of checking a box.
Maybe I'm just speaking for me because, again, I'm like, Gwen, will you Gwen us? And by us, I mean me. We talked about guilt earlier today and shame, and shame's coming up now. And I think Rhonda made a really beautiful point that says, I tend to say we need to go upstream to address the shame. We dig into the here and now details, and that's not where our shame is from generally. Absolutely. And also what I love about what Gwen's saying is that we're taking the safe space for shame and the processing and metabolizing of shame, and we're separating it from where we're supposed to be being productive, hopeful, optimistic, and focused, right? Like, yes, heck yes, hold the space, feel the feels, but don't do what Gwen's saying, which is I'm so guilty of being like, I'm really sorry that I didn't get shit done, but at least I'm accountable. And it's like, no. And I wasn't, it's always the unexpected topics, right? But I feel like this is important to say because I've been on both sides of this, where I have been in the room in a position of power in some really unsafe group coaching situations in terms of emotional abuse that I didn't necessarily, thankfully I wasn't leading them, right? But I didn't know any better. And at the end of the day, I was on the coaching staff. So even though I didn't know any better, right? But I think the problem is now I'm seeing it in a whole new way. We did not have the appropriate attitude about accountability because I would watch people get not publicly shamed, but definitely called out or discluded.
Oh
And
yeah.
what would happen as the coach of these people is just like when you're in grade school and the teacher goes, come to the front of the class. Why didn't you do your homework? The second you shame someone, this cannot just be a neurodivergent thing, but for me, as someone who lives and dies on the spectrum, like if you embarrass me, I'm out. Right?
Right.
Like, and so I think that you're so right that part of the reason I said this session was about why don't the communities we join work? I think they don't have the appropriate look at what accountability is. I think that they don't take enough of a stance to say, this is not emotional in the way that you might think. This is not tell us all the reasons you're a piece of shit if it doesn't get done. This is get back on track, get it done. This is project management as much as it's anything. So how do we and along the way using self inquiry as a tool, but like how do we recalibrate or any other tool to more of that project management view of accountability while creating as ooey gooey a space as we want? Because we're also not saying be an unemotional hack. We're saying, so what, how do
Yeah.
we tie this up with a bow? How do we create spaces that are responsibly accountable in a way that actually works and feeds us as well? Because so many of us are leading communities that just take and take and take from us. Wouldn't it be great if we could receive? All right, I'm done. And Brand, you go.
It's so funny. So what the real trick here is to realize that the action is different than the emotion, right? And so often when we're not doing something, when we ask the question why, we immediately, so if I say, why were you 3 minutes late? Okay, to this. That immediately makes it about you and your behavior and your emotion, and it's all about you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that immediately puts us into our head and all that negative self-talk that we all have, all of those things. And when I say, hey, what happened that allowed this to be 3 minutes late? And you'll say, because I, no, you had a technical difficulty. Then we can talk about, well, so what are the options that we could do to help with the technical difficulty so that doesn't happen next time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not about you're a good person or a bad person or, and it becomes
This
nothing about,
already happened on my last tech nightmare. You're like, why didn't you hire Tanya?
it's like, you should hire Tanya,
Boom.
but it ends up not being you're a bad person because you didn't hire Tanya.
And you're not saying, why didn't you hire Tanya, you stupid idiot who will
Right.
never be successful a day in your life and will die in a box because of the decisions you made at 2:57 p.m. on Wednesday, June 11th, you dumbass. Like, that's not what you said. You said, why didn't you hire Tanya? Or you should have hired Tanya. No, you didn't say should. You would never should. Like, have you
Yeah.
considered hiring Tanya?
Yeah. It's like, ooh, next time, Tanya.
Oh my God, right on time as a commercial for Tanya. Dee Dee says, the answer to everything, hire Tanya.
Which is hysterical because I get Tanya, a ton of work because she also works for me. But that's yeah. Tanya is my CMO. She's helped Deanna. Annie's worked with her when we've done podcast things and whatnot. And but she's also been a producer for large of these kind of things.
See the generosity here? Gwen's like, hold on, let's talk about Tanya because we understand that community, that again is that self generosity. Am I out competing me? Like, hey, let's talk about Tanya because we understand that that's how the world all flows and goes, right? So, okay, we've talked about self inquiry, we've talked about accountability, we've talked about shame, we talked a little bit about guilt. How do you show up with deep feels in a business environment in a way that helps you feel heard, but also doesn't feel like you're turning something into an inappropriate you fest? Do you have any tips on that as a participant or as a guide? Like, because sometimes I feel like I really have to hold back. And then other times I'm in the room with people that are just like, thank you so much for hosting this networking event. I would like to tell you about my kidney. And I'm like, whoa. So in our final minute, how do we ask of ourselves, what do I need from this group? And how do we show up accordingly if we're not feeling optimal?
So I think that the key thing is to be, and this is one of those all you have to do is kind of things, which it sounds so easy and it is simple, but it is not easy, which is being truly honest with yourself. We get so caught in being the person that we would like to be, or that we think someone wants us to be, or that we think we need to be, and fill in all of the words, right?
Yeah.
But being able to be truly honest with yourself and answering that question in a really honest way, which sometimes is, what I need is to not show up. I need the space, right? Sometimes the answer is, I need to just be around people, but I need to be allowed to not have to contribute. That can be true too. Sometimes it is, I need fill in some other blank. And then the question is this the right group to be filling in that need? Right? I need to talk about my kidney. Okay, but this is a business networking group and none of them are doctors.
Ma'am, this is a Wendy's.
Right, exactly. This is a business networking group and none of them are medical practitioners.
Right.
Probably this is not the best place for that. So it is that self inquiry, and it sounds simple, but it's hard. And that's why having what I call myself is a highly interested, disinterested party.
There's another one. Highly interested, disinterested party. Are you what's his name? The guy that wrote Alice in Wonderland? What's his name?
Lewis.
You broke
Lewis.
my brain so much I forgot C.S. Lewis's name. Look at that. They're taking my dork card away. Thank you so much for your presence and your brilliance. Mwah, Gwen, I love you. And thank you as always for making me feel so much better.
I loved being here. Thanks for having me.
Raw, real, and just a little dangerous. This is Feral.